This is episode 113 of the Rocker Dog Podcast, the show that puts the spotlight on the dogs of your favorite musical artists. I'm your host, Tim Dill. The dog I put on a pedestal every day is my bestest boy, Charlie. And today it's our pleasure to bring you our dog-centric interview with Keith Jeffery of Atlas Genius, a band that also consists of his brothers Steven and Michael. Their first new album in 9 years, entitled End of the Tunnel, came out last month, and they are currently on a U.S. tour with Robert DeLong until October 21st. And these are his sometime vegetarian rocker dogs.
Well, there's two. So we have Rosie and Henry. Rosie is a golden lab and Henry is a black lab.
And how old are they each?
So Rosie is, she's probably coming up to 4 years, and Henry is about a year and a half.
Okay. Now, I was going to start by going straight to what I felt was probably the soul dog to you and your brothers, and that was Marcus.
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment to say that he's kind of...
Yes. Yeah, he was great. He had a long life, and it was amazing.
Let's talk about him, and then we'll circle back to Rosie and Henry, and then I've got a couple of other dogs that pop in and out. But what a reoccurring theme on this podcast, and even one of the reasons why I even started it in the first place, was when of the many musicians I did follow on social media, literally everyone that had a dog would post about how much they missed the dog, including yourself, who had a very funny post that said, "Haven't seen this fella for 6 months. I'm dying to grab that big boof head in a few weeks." And to echo that, Steven once wrote, "One of the hardest things about going overseas to tour is leaving this boy back in Australia." And then Michael said, 21 days until I hang with this guy again, missing this crazy little dude. So I have to ask,
you're going to make me emotional.
And I know that you could say this about all dogs, but again, Marcus, you guys had him for 15 years. What made him so special?
Well, you're choking me up here. He was the first dog that we ever had, right, as a family. And my dad had a golden lab when he was a boy called Marcus. So we would always hear stories about Marcus. Marcus number one, larger than life, apparently. My dad grew up in Broken Hill, which is a mining town in the centre of Australia. And back in the 60s, Labradors and dogs in general, probably the same in America, dogs would just roam free. You know, they'd be in the backyard, but then they might go for a walk about with a pack of other dogs and come home whenever they wanted to. So apparently he would do that. And, he would go out, they'd hear the gate, he'd let himself in, he knew how to open the gate apparently and let himself in. And so he'd come in after his night of whatever he was doing. And
Revelry.
Apparently sometimes he'd go revelry, and sometimes he'd go missing for a week, and they'd find him up at the mine shaft. There was a mine nearby him, maybe a few kilometres away from where my dad and his family lived at the time. And he would apparently, there was one time he went missing for a week, and they kind of assumed, maybe Marcus had been hit by a car. This is the longest he's been gone. And then they got a call from the miners. So, "Do you have a dog called Marcus? He's being fed by the miners as they go up and down the shaft. Like as they go in, they'd give him their leftovers." So he must have thought he was onto a great little situation there. So we would always hear about Marcus 1. And then it was actually around about the time my brothers and I all left home, we got a Labrador. It wasn't really as a replacement for us, but I think in some ways it kind of, the empty nester thing of like the parents, all of a sudden their kids have left. So Marcus was this dog who would stay with my parents, but he was a fan. Everyone loved him. Like we'd come back on weekends. And so he was a well-loved dog. But we were talking about this just the other day. He was not needy at all. He wouldn't bark. He didn't bark for about the first 6 years of his life.
Wow.
So he would just wait at the back door if you wanted to come in, and sometimes that might be 3 hours. You go out there and like, oh no, he's been sitting there. But he was just the sweetest. He was and he was particularly buffy. I think the breeder who gave us, we went and got him as an 8-week-old pup, and we were allocated Marcus, this little ball of fluff, and he was gorgeous, but he had a particularly deep chest, like a chest that was so deep that I guess a breeder would almost think of it as being a deformity, because show dogs have to have a certain sort of dimensions, I think, to have a chance of winning. And he was so buffy, so thick, and his chest would almost like it wouldn't scrape the ground, but like he was only a few inches from the ground.
Yeah.
So he was legendary, and really sweet. And I guess being the first dog that we'd had, it was a really strong bond that we had with him. But we were playing a lot of shows by the time we got him. So we felt like we were neglecting him. Like we were out a lot. And so he spent a lot of time on his own. And he never complained, never barked, but he was just a beautiful soul. And he passed in late 2022, nearly 16. He was like 15 and a half or a little bit older. So he had a good run, but never easy.
Yeah, yeah, I can understand that. And you guys do such a great job of showing so much love on your social media. You know, you really get a sense of who this dog was and how special he was. And it's funny one of the questions I usually ask is like the context around getting him, which you answered, but going back 15 years without getting into ages, are you guys still late teenagers or early 20s?
Yeah, this was 20. We're in our 20s. Are different. Yeah, the brothers. I mean, we're three brothers. We're like 4.5 years from
Okay.
oldest to youngest apart. So, yeah, mid to early to mid 20s.
Okay. And, speaking of him being upset that you're gone all the time, we see this again, this another reoccurring theme in this podcast is these dogs that recognize the suitcase. And you had exactly that post where it says he always seems to know we're about to leave the country. Did he ever show any outward signs or act up?
Act up as in like start chewing things or making a mess.
I mean, the reason I ask is we have a couple of funny examples where Jay Weinberg, who at the time was a drummer for Slipknot, he had a dog, when he pulled out his suitcase, this is a potty trained dog, pooped in the suitcase. And another, a singer-songwriter, Sean McConnell, same type of thing. He had a guitar case and he had an older dog that knew darn well, how to go to the bathroom, and the dog peed in the guitar case.
Yeah, we'd never had a situation like that. I think he would just be sort of somber if the suitcases were coming out. He knew what that meant. I feel like there were moments where he may have laid in the suitcase. There was no going to the toilet in the suitcase, but he would just be sort of somber, and there was a seriousness. I think I know what this means, and I've noticed that with the new labs that they get a bit like that too.
Okay, well, let's get back to Rosie and Henry. Why the two? What was the time period between one and the other?
So I got Rosie. It was the same breeder that Marcus had been collected from back in the day. And it was quite a renowned breeder, like really they had some champion Labradors through the years. And they're not overly large Labradors. They're probably on the smaller side of the spectrum of the labs, because you get sometimes a lab will be quite tall. They're not short, but they're not massive. And we always just loved Marcus. So I contacted Bev and said, "Oh, Marcus is doing really well." At that point, he would have been 13 or so, 13 or 14. But, knowing that eventually we're going to lose Marcus because he was slowing down, I thought it would be nice to have another Labrador for him, potentially, but definitely for us. And Marcus didn't want to have a bar of it. We brought Rosie home as an 8-week-old puppy, and she was super excited, right? And he was in his face. And I think he'd lived a life just as a solo dude, and he just was, "What the hell have you done? What is this?"
What did I do wrong?
She was full of energy. Yeah, and so she'd be all cute. She'd do this thing where she'd kind of go up next to him and sort of be real coy, and she'd roll on her back and then somehow accidentally roll into him with her mouth, her fangs out, and sort of start play biting him. And he was like, "I'm just not into this." But the hope was that they'd get on and he'd have some company. But I think there's a time frame for that. I've learned that you don't want to introduce a young pup too late in a dog's life.
Yeah.
So then I guess Rosie would have been 1.5 or 2 or something when Marcus finally passed. So for a short period of time, Rosie was on her own. I just thought it was unfair for Rosie to not have another dog. And luckily she was still young, and Henry came along a couple of years later, and they're best friends now. It was the opposite experience of when we introduced Rosie to Marcus. They're both young, super energetic, and they are inseparable.
I know from personal experience, it's tough raising a puppy. And I go back to a couple of, this is actually Michael's posts. He said, Rosie sleeps all day and up all night. So were there certain challenges at your age and occupation raising the dog as a puppy?
Yeah, I had some regrets for there was a few weeks in and no sleep. It was like having a newborn child. It is very tiring, as you know.
Yeah.
But then they calm down. I mean, you got there's a few months where you're toilet training and teaching them not to chew everything in the house, and then they calm down. And then, I mean, Labradors particularly are just so easy. Once they get through that sort of first sort of 6 months or so, seem to calm down a lot. And Rosie, it was funny with Rosie. It was a near-death experience that seemed to mellow her out. She was pretty crazy for the first 7 months. Then one day, she she was just off. You know, the energy levels were low, or if she did eat, she would vomit, and it was really distressing. Like, what is going on here? So took her to the emergency vet. Proceeded to do all the wrong tests. Didn't X-ray. That's a key part of the story is didn't X-ray the dog, and came back with some blood tests that said that it potentially had this really rare blood disease that was going to require lifelong medication. Really rare in Labradors, but somehow it seems like this is what the markers are showing. I'm like, that's crazy. Wow, that's okay. Do what you got to do. Still was really sick, and then took her back to our normal vet who hadn't been available for a few days, and he did an X-ray and said she swallowed a rope.
Yeah.
So the one thing I thought that the vet would have, the initial vet would have done to do an X-ray, but didn't do it. And the whole thing was she'd swallowed a rope, which wasn't going to pass. So he said she could die at any minute. Is it okay if we operate? I said, well, absolutely. Just do what you got to do. And operated and took the rope out, and she was fine. But ever since that day, she came home a more mature, just, I think she just, I don't know whether she appreciated us saving her life or what it was, but she just mellowed.
Yeah,
She's
it's
been
funny. I've
perfect.
had that happen twice in my friend group, and it's the chew toys that have the plastic noisemaker. They end up swallowing the plastic noisemaker, and it creates the blockage,
Oh,
and But
yeah.
yeah, oh gosh. But
Yeah.
I was going to say just in this whole puppy conversation, it's funny how fast they mature, but it's funny how fast they physically grow. And again, I go back to a post that Michael had, and it said, "Here's a photo of Rosie before she's fully grown in the next 24 hours."
Yeah, it is. It's crazy, isn't it? And every day you don't notice it, but then if you look back at a photo from a month before, you're like, oh my God, it's just amazing.
Yeah, leaps and bounds. So
Yeah,
with you, there was only one other dog that I saw that I was going to ask about, and it was Daisy, who I think was a white
yeah.
Pomeranian.
So Daisy was my brother's girlfriend at the time. He had a long-term girlfriend, and she lived with us in California. So she has, I think Daisy, from what I know, is still kicking. Daisy was a white Pomeranian. I had never been a fan of Pomeranians, no disrespect to Pomeranian owners, but I just hadn't had any experience with it. I'd just always been around larger dogs. Daisy was a complicated dog, like didn't like walks, and I'd never experienced a dog that hated going outside. But Daisy was, yeah, a very lovable, but a complicated soul.
Well, there was a
Nothing
picture of
like a
you
Labrador.
holding her up on stage. You were in Napa. That was the location.
Yeah, I think I actually afterwards I thought, mate, I could have almost killed that dog because I took her. She was backstage, and I thought I'm going to take her out and show her the crowd. There'll be an experience for her, and everyone loves dogs. But she'll get to see. I think it was like 1,000 people or something in this room, and her heart was just pumping.
Oh
And you think
no.
about she was an introverted Pomeranian who'd lived in an apartment her whole life. All of a sudden, she's standing on a stage in front of 1,000 humans. So I don't know what her heart was doing, but she could have been close to death, I think.
Well, thinking back, there is an expression on her face that looks like a little shocked.
Yeah,
Well, let's give a little time to your new music. You've got a new album out, the first
we
album in
do.
9 years, and I
Yeah.
have to ask, what took so long? Are the dogs to blame?
Oh man. Well, no, the dogs are definitely not to blame. The dogs keep you sane, I think. I think during those periods where you're trying to get a record together and dealing with all the industry, dogs will keep you sane. But why did it take so long? That is a great question, and I asked myself. So we put out a few singles throughout that time. There's been songs. There was a song called "Can't Be Alone Tonight," 63 Days, "Elegant Strangers." They came out sort of during that. But we actually made a full length record in about 2017, and I scrapped it. We got to the point where we started to mix the record, and I was like, "This is just not right." And so that was a long period. That was a long period of like making a record, scrapping it. Then we started to write some new stuff, and then the pandemic hit. So that this record we're putting out now, that most of that had been written and recorded right at the beginning of the pandemic, so the beginning of 2020. The guys came out here to this studio I'm in right now, and it was in essence done. And then the pandemic hit. And then we were with a record label then that didn't want to put it out if we couldn't tour. Of course, nobody could tour. So that lasted a few years. And then we eventually separated, parted ways with that label. And so we're only just putting it out now. So it was this kind of comedy of, not errors, but comedy of like these situational things that kept cropping up. So that's why it took so long. And I'm shocked when I think, man, it's 9 years. Because it feels like it's been 3, you know. I feel like I've been trying to get the record out for 9 years. That's Spinal Tap. Or
Now, more importantly, were there any studio dogs present?
Oh, always. So, well, Marcus was with us during the making of that record. So Marcus was he was in the studio a little bit when we did it. So I guess there's a bit of Marcus in there. Rosie would have been along in the mix towards the end. And then Daisy writing some of the songs in the apartment in Los Angeles. Daisy would have been there. I'm trying to think if there are any other dogs. There would have been a few studio dogs around in Los Angeles that I'm maybe forgetting. Oh, do you know what? I have to make a special mention. So one of my best friends in Los Angeles, Jim Kaufman, is another record producer. He had 2 British bulldogs, and one was called Rupert and one was called Neve. And so based on, Rupert Neve, the famous audio electrical engineer, I guess you'd call him, who designed all the famous mixing desks that we all revere now. So Rupert and Neve were there when we were writing some songs. There's a song on the record called 63 Days, and they were there for that. But they sadly passed, I think, within a year of each other. And Neve was only a young girl. I think she was like 4 or 5 when she passed. She had I forget the illness, but I think she had cancer. So it was really sad. It was really sad. Dogs cut when their lives are cut way too short. I guess it's like the same with, when you hear about children or anyone who dies way too young. But special mention to those 2 dogs because they were just so beautiful.
Yeah, I think you might have posted Rupert, but in that case, when they're not your dogs, what do they bring to the party? They still bring you something that's either, is it calming or is it, I can identify with this, or it's not that it's a high pressure situation, but I think what you do is it's so revealing sometimes that I think
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's a great question. That's a great question because dogs bring so many things. They'll bring humor. Often you'll be in a situation and you're really stressed and like, oh, I can't get the lyric, or I don't know, is this song any good, or do we need to rewrite it, or should we scrap this? And the dog will come in and do something, and you're just like, that just goes out the window. They're like this eternal like little jester in the studio and doing cute things because they don't care. They don't care. They're probably wondering why we're making these weird noises, but the dogs are just there being dogs, and so they bring that. They're caring. I know that there were times. I mean, Marcus was great at this, where you'd be really upset. We all go through these times in life, and Marcus would just sit with you. He'd just know, and I guess a lot of dogs are like that. They just know. They just sit, and it's in a way that they wouldn't normally do. Like he would always have come up to you, but he would just have this way. If he saw somebody who was crying or clearly in distress, he would just come and sit next to you. So dogs, they're comforting. They'll entertain you. They'll lighten the mood. I mean, they're the greatest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's across the board, but I love hearing about the context of the studio because, again, that comes up so often. And on social media, there's so many times that it won't be their dog, but they got to take a picture and post that this is the studio dog, this is the name, and it's.
Well, there were photos we've still got photos somewhere of Marcus sitting underneath the snare drum. And then it happened again the other day. So we were rehearsing for the tour that's coming up. But I literally, it was the same as. So here was Henry underneath Michael's drums again, right?
That's awesome.
And the funny thing about dogs, I mean, they've got much better hearing than we do, but happy to sit underneath a drum kit that's 110 dB.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I wrap up every episode with what I call the zoomies. Do you guys have the zoomies in Australia? You know what that is?
When your dog does like a hot lap. Yeah, we call it like a hot lap.
A hot lap, yeah. And these are just the last 5 fast, frivolous questions. First one is the most frivolous, and that's: do you kiss your dogs on the mouth?
I'll kiss them on the head and on the side of the mouth. If they come up and give you a kiss on the cheek, sure, but
you don't seek it
I know
out.
where those mouths. I know when they're out in the garden. I know the kind of things they eat.
Oh yeah. The next question, let's use Rosie and Henry. Do either of them have a theme song? Like when they come walking into the room, what would be playing for them?
Yeah, so Rosanna which I think is
Oh, yeah.
Toto.
Yep,
That's
Toto.
Rosanna. So I'll sing that to Rosie quite a lot. She probably hates it. I don't know about Henry. I'm not sure if I probably do, but I can't place it in.
Okay. All right. And question 3, hypothetical. If they went on tour with you, what would they want on their tour rider?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So we're pretty healthy with these dogs. Often, if I bring them back from a beach walk, I'll give them carrots.
Hmm.
The Labradors, they eat everything. There's like a rawhide thing that we will give them sometimes that they particularly like here as well. Yeah, probably carrots.
Are the dogs vegetarian?
So the dogs are vegetarian when it comes to their morning and nightly meals. That's vegetarian. Some of the treats aren't. When they were pups, we gave them a mixture of vegetarian and some meat as well, just to make sure they had enough nutrients for those formative growing months.
Yeah.
So some people hearing
And
this might think it's dog abuse to not give them
yeah.
pies and meat.
And you're a vegetarian or vegan?
Yeah.
Does that journey have anything to, like, how did you get there?
Well, it's funny. So I haven't had meat for, I think it's 13 years. So a couple of years after Marcus came along. The main reason I don't eat meat is it's an ethical thing. I just I'm happy enough living without meat, and I couldn't kill an animal myself. Right,
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. So therefore, the idea of outsourcing it to someone else who has to work in an abattoir, killing animals, I think it doesn't sit with me.
Okay. Question 4 is, do you use a dog voice?
There's probably a few. I think like Henry is a very, very loving dog. I've learned this about Labradors, or at least these Labradors, is that the male Labradors are particularly snuggly. Rosie's more sort of standoffish. She's a bit more cat-like. She'll come up to you when she wants, like
Yeah.
a cat. But Henry will always come up for a cuddle, just like who's a good boy. The classic kind of
Yeah.
anything that gets that tail wagging. He seems to like that.
Okay. It's funny you said that. I just had an interview earlier today, and she said the same thing. She's like, the male dog, she's like, I don't know if this is true, but in my experience, the male dogs are more affectionate and the female dogs are a little bit more independent.
That's what I've noticed, just in my experience.
Yeah. All right. And last but not least, question 5 is, I always ask if there's a dog service or an organization that you want to give a shout out to.
That's a good question because I'm based in Australia. Obviously, I'm not well versed in the American dog shelters, etc. What I used to enjoy going to in California was the Gentle Barn. So Gentle Barn was more farm animals,
Yep.
but they had rescued farm animals, and so you'd get to spend time with cows that had been destined to be slaughtered, or pigs and horses, etc. That was really sweet. But yeah, the Gentle Barn in California was doing a good job. That's the one I think I've had the most sort of personal experience with.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Yeah. My sister's a big animal advocate. She's been out there volunteering a number of times. And what I normally do is just I'll seek out a little bit more information and put it in the show notes, that goes up on, whatever, Spotify and Apple when this episode comes out. So we'll push their messages. Well, awesome. Keith, you've completed your first of what promises to be many dog-oriented interviews. I just want to thank you for your time. Good. It's always a pleasure of mine. I'm fully sincere when I say this, to meet the artist and hear more about their dogs. I think it really helps people understand how valuable dogs are. So thank you.
They really are. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right.